interest of time, we can go ahead and get started. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all. The Office of Alumni and Parent Engagement is thrilled to welcome three of our wonderful panelists tonight to talk a bit more about what is digital literacy. So I'll hand it over to Joe to begin introductions.
Hi, everybody. So I am Joe Murphy. I am the director of the Center for Innovative Pedagogy at Kenyon College, which is a fancy way of saying I buy faculty members lunch and keep them talking. I've actually, one of my friends, when I got this gig, was kind enough to make me a little plaque that has she got one of the classes to translate "That's so crazy it just might work" into Latin, and I've got that on my wall. So that's my role, is to look at people who want to do different things, interesting things they heard about somewhere, people who just want to address something that they wish could be different. And they talk to my office about things like digital literacies, and we see what we can do that's kind of authentic to their discipline and their interests, and useful for the students and successful for everybody. The college has just actually wrapped up, thank goodness, a big grant from the Andrew Mellon Foundation, which allowed us to do a lot of work in the digital storytelling area. So we've been able to do faculty workshops and bring in some guest experts and fund some course innovation grants that allowed faculty members to do some really interesting things in the classroom. So I'm really interested in telling you what we've been doing, and hearing from everybody else about their interests. And I will pass it over to Orchid.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Hey, everyone. My name is Orchid Tierney. I'm an assistant professor here at Kenyon College. I teach in the English department. I'm in a really sort of weird sort of liminal space in the sense that people often ask me, what do I do? And I kind of feel like I kind of do a lot of different things. I wear different hats. My primary specialty is actually in environmental humanities, where I study waste and waste management in contemporary American experimental poetry, as well as atmospheric humanities, where I look at air pollution and how that gets represented. But here's the funny thing is that my dissertation is actually was involved quite substantially in electronic literature. I have a very long interest in digital humanities, digital poetry, computer coding, digital storytelling as well. And I try to incorporate that aspect as much as I possibly can in my environmental humanities work. In fact, I've just recently completed a chapter on contemporary American digital poetry that has an invested interest in tactical media, or that is often has this kind of digital electronic literature has an invested interest in exploring political and cultural issues. But before that, just to sort of go even further back, I have a long history in storytelling. I did work as an art director for, I'm proud to say, New Zealand's #1 soap opera, Shortland Street, which was a medical soap opera. And I have tried to incorporate my interest in media in multiple forms and multiple formats as much as I possibly can. So that's a little bit about myself, and I'm really excited to talk about digital literacy in its variegated forms, because it's such a critical issue in higher education. And on that, I'll throw over physically or figuratively to Brett.
Hi, my name is Brett Pierce. I am the class of '81 from Kenyon. I live in Maine. I am an educator, a producer, a program developer. Most of my background is with Sesame Workshop, where I worked for 20 years off and on. And that put me into the kind of developing media for social change space, working in their global department. And that somewhere along the line, I shifted to trying to figure out how to translate the skill sets that I had about, here's a curriculum, let's tell a positive and engaging story about that curricular goal. And that process is an incredibly important process, and let's bring that into the school system here. And that has led me for the past 10 years to run a nonprofit called Meridian Stories. Meridian Stories is designed to bring digital storytelling into the schools. It's designed to make it normative in the schools. And that's kind of my latest, that's a bit of a crusade I'm on, and something we're going to talk about more tonight. And that has led to a book called Expanding Literacy, Bringing Digital Storytelling into the Classroom, which will be published by Heinemann Publishing in about 3 weeks' time. So that's kind of why I'm here, and it has led me to just want to just kind of excavate literacy and education, and how do we move kind of a very traditional model of education to encompass all of these different literacies that are exploding around us right now. So to kind of take it the next step, if we can get the first slide, please, Kim. This is designed to kind of introduce the topic at hand. What is literacy? There it is. So I'm just going to, read this and just pull it out a little bit. The world has shifted from a mostly singular text-based literacy that demands an educated command of its structures and intricacies. That's the literacy that we all are educated in. That's what we know. That's text, that's sentence structure, that's grammar, that's putting together your arguments and your theses and your hypotheses and these sorts of things. And from a wide-ranging set of literacies that bring imagery, symbols, sound, and music to the fore, along with the text, that jettison long-established text-based structures like sentence structure and grammar. Okay, if you do a photo essay, there's no grammar to that photo essay. If you're doing a digital story, you can make things go really, really quickly, or you can kind of make them go, as long as you'd like. That often live in the immediacy of now. So much of the communication and conversation going on is happening in real time. Whereas you think about our traditional literacy, it takes, months, weeks, years to kind of put together those arguments that then get published and kind of passed down. But now we're in this kind of moment where things are just happening back and forth, and it's text-based and it's sound-based and it's image-based. And what is that literacy? And that, on the other hand, on one hand, requires a host of complex skill sets to master. Digital storytelling is not easy. Okay, because back up to line number 3, sound, music, text, imagery, making them all work together is hard. It's really hard, but on the other hand, addresses educational equity issues by not being solely language-based. Okay, we all know that command of language is a ticket into higher education because of our traditional literacies, but digital literacy or digital storytelling is not language dependent. And so that begins to open up whole new kind of avenues and pathways for a much wider base of people. So one of the questions we're going to ask here is education meeting the students' need to be positive contributors, productive, thoughtful participants, not just texting back and forth, not just silly TikToks, but TikToks that have impact in these various literacies that are dominating the local and global dialogue. So that's me trying to tee up the issues that we want to talk about. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Orchid, to kind of begin to wrestle with some of this stuff.
Yeah, this is really great. In fact, you've sort of sparked even more ideas in relationship to how much digital literacy embeds, I guess, socio-political assumptions as well. And so the key for me is in terms of how to instruct students with digital literacy is what kind of skill sets can I give them that will enable them not only to use the rhetoric of digital literacy in a way that's productive and generative, but actually encourage them to be critical evaluators of the media that they receive on a daily basis. I'm actually going to share my own slide because I want to go over it just to sort of discuss what is literacy or digital literacy from my perspective as a professor. So I'm just going to share my own slide portion of the screen. There we go. Can I just get a thumbs up, Kim, if you can see it says digital literacy? Oh, my wonderful picture is not going. There we go. So I just there we go. I am sort of like fascinated. Anyone who's been in my classes will know that I'm absolutely obsessed with memes. And the reason being is that they do really crystallize what I think is kind of critical to some of the ideas that Brett has just invoked. And the idea, but you know, how can we apply sort of like the emergence of say image and text, but also sound, visuals, and also duration. You know, the extended field of language that includes duration or kinetic movement of language. So just for myself as a professor of English, you know, when I think of digital literacy, I think of that digital literacy involves critically evaluating signs and symbols, the values and perspectives that are not only embedded in digital texts and images, but also they are also transmitted through platforms, software, and as well as hardware. And by this I mean that the images, the texts, the sounds, the visuals are not value neutral, but neither are the technologies themselves, neither are the medium. They are embedded in a cultural political system that has its own ideologies, and it reflects the real world. I mean, we know this. How many times do people share GIFs or memes without really sort of thinking and critically evaluating what do those images actually really mean? How are we using these images in a way that reflects our perspectives or reflects hidden assumptions about the world we are in? And I think this is really important, especially from a pedagogical and higher education point of view, because, and something that Brett sort of I think implied earlier, is like we want students to be able to not just simply text, but to be critically evaluating the materials that they're using on a day-to-day basis. You know, and I think, you know, one of the case in point for me is that we are actually living in a very media saturated world, to the point where sometimes it's easier just to go on Twitter, type something up, you know, complain about something, and then press tweet and not really sort of think about the consequence of those sorts of actions. And it is really worth sort of thinking about how language and syntax exists in these sort of spaces that can be used to sort of enhance disinformation economies that amplify racist, gendered, and economic inequalities. But how can we also use these tools in order to sort of allow students to find their voice in a really productive way, to actually use these technologies for their own personal sort of self-expression, rather than getting subsumed into the monstrosity that is social media today. And I think, you know, being digitally literate actually can really help students, as well as artists such as myself, find a vocabulary to challenge the kinds of injustice or the kinds of inequities that exists in the real world and meat space, so to speak, but also can help them to share their own stories that can, in a way that actually amplifies their voices. And I just want to give you a really just a quick example. I highly recommend that you look at this Twine Game. I just recently wrote on this text, and it's a Twine. If you're not familiar with Twine, it's a kind of like a hypertext platform that also serves as a kind of game. So, and it can be Twine will allow users to play through different trajectories or different pathways to explore a different narrative arc. Anna Anthropy, her hunt for the gay planet. Whoops, go away. Hunt for the Gay Planet is a really fantastic Twine game that actually spoofs the Macabre Planet from the Star Wars The Old Republic DLC. And this particular game, or this game has been sort of challenged because they do have queer characters in this game, but they're only accessible to paying customers. But what she does in this particular game is to explore sort of the styling of queer experiences in the gaming industry. And she does this in a way that sort of helps people to sort of explore the different trajectories of what it means to create and foster worlds of representation and diversity that is much more inclusive. It's also a very funny game as well, and so she does brilliantly combine sort of hypertextual pathways with with narrative storytelling in a way to make this sort of broader critical critique. So just to sort of sum up before I sort of pull back and punt to Joe, is that, you know, in the context of when I'm thinking about digital literacy, particularly in the educational environment, you know, I think for myself it's really important to find ways to encourage students to understand that literacy is not just, as Brett suggests, it's multiple forms, it's literacies, but it involves critically evaluating the transmission of textual signs, sonic and visual signs as well. It involves critically evaluating media, platform, and technology that makes these signs possible. And it involves actually utilizing digital rhetoric to communicate ideas to a general readership in a way that helps them or enhances their learning, as opposed to a foreclosing meaning. So I think I'll stop there. I'll stop sharing my slides, and I'll throw it over to Joe to take up this mantle.
Thank you. Thank you, Orchid. Lots of terrific, wonderful stuff. I guess I'd kind of like to continue. It would be useful, I think, to say that I came to Kenyon as a librarian. That's my disciplinary background. I was trained as a reference librarian in the mid-90s. And at that time, in the way that I was, at the school that I was at and the education I was pursuing and the thrust of my early jobs, we had a concept of information literacy that was very much focused around the production of academic texts. And certainly, people working in school libraries would probably say that was never it, but and there are other ways to think about that. But for the path I followed, we were very much thinking that what was important was understanding the difference between PsycInfo for psychology papers and ERIC for education papers and social science abstracts for other views. And it was about getting students to adapt to tools and to understand those and learn the different thesauruses and the different search operators that, and which ones were cross-cutting and which ones were unique to that tool, so that you would be looking at the right material, learning to evaluate it in an academic sense, and then eventually generating your own material. And that's, again, there are people who will hear that and say, well, these are the shortcomings in Joe's education, and they'll be right, but it was mine. One of the really interesting things that I've seen happening in that debate, in that thrust, as we go into the more digital literacies and some newer concepts of information literacy, is that it's gradually becoming focused on a much bigger audience than just the creation of academic material. We've recognized the degree to which this is a citizenship skill. This is a general social skill. This is, for whether you're trying to get, I like to cook, whether you're trying to get recipes off the internet, or whether you're trying to evaluate the claims of your potential elected officials. Lateral reading is useful. Look at different sources to see what they're saying and how similar or different they are. And I think a lot of those things also play into the digital literacy space, that there was a lot of digital literacy that was very heavily tool-tied in the early 90s. Learn this one and you'll be able to go. And I think that one of the distinguishing factors that we're seeing in the good digital literacy work that's being done at Kenyon and elsewhere is the recognition that whatever we teach you is probably going to change. All of those sessions I did in the late 90s about here's how the ERIC thesaurus works were blown out of the water by Google, and then blown again out of the water by Google Scholar. In a lot of different ways. It's still very valuable to understand Boolean logic and that kind of search term. And there are a lot of things where there are specific technical skills that are useful. But I think one of the really interesting things in the digital literacy and digital storytelling area is in getting at some of these cross-cutting principles. Brett referred to time, and Orchid talked about kind of the kinetics of your message. That's the kind of thing that, in interesting ways, becomes cross-cutting. Have you written to be read by the voice as opposed to written to be read on paper? Have you learned enough of I will refer to it as the grammar of a tool, in a lot of ways, these become similar to learning, a language in a family of languages. There are lots of different video editors. They basically all cut and move video in about, as near as I can tell, 2 to 3 ways. So if you can learn one, you start to learn it's probably an icon that looks sort of like a scissors, and it's probably a click and drag and move. So you start to learn. The goal is that we don't end up with students who say, well, I only know iMovie, I couldn't possibly do it on Adobe. And instead says, well, if I have done it in one, I bet I can get my feet under me and figure the next thing out. So that's been a very interesting portion of it. The other interesting portion in working with this grant at Kenyon has been taking a very broad view of what could constitute a digital story. And Orchid talked about memes. Orchid's class is doing podcasting. One of the things we've seen at Kenyon is that a lot of faculty members gravitate toward podcasting specifically because it does not involve teaching video editing. This may or may not be an accurate reflection of the amount of work involved, but it's certainly a perception of work that if I have to learn video editing, that's going to be a harder thing for me to do. And to some people, it's possible to say, well, you can do that or not. What we want to do is allow people to make choices about what's a meaningful way for them to do something, or even in the generating memes, the various different ways to think about different digital literacies. And that's one of the reasons I really appreciate my colleagues who have taught me to say it in the plural, to kind of reject the idea that there is a digital literacy that's approachable, and to understand that all of these different areas of literacy are kind of their own specialties, and we can teach people to get around. So Lisa, I want to respond to that. Lisa says, in my experiences, adults are hesitant to move from X to Y, but I don't think students ever show that hesitation. Their digital confidence is fuel for the work. That's true of lots of students. That's definitely true of lots of students. One of the things that we see at Kenyon and that my colleagues at other schools see is that the diversity of student experience is vast, which means that their confidence in different areas of it is vast. Which means that you're likely to be at Kenyon in a 20-person class with 2 students who have actually made full-on video productions and are extremely confident and ready to go, and a student who has never, ever considered this and does not have the digital confidence in that particular area. So one of the really interesting questions is how we create assignments and scaffold experiences and provide support that allows the student who is kind of ready to say, can I just do this the way I know how, to succeed at approximately the same rate as the student who is saying, I've never done this before and I would really like my hand held. And that's the kind of thing I am blessed to be able to do at Kenyon. Thank you. That's a really useful comment, and I think it's really useful to think about the ways that the ways that there are genuine generational differences, but also the diversity of experiences within generations. I think that's basically, actually, the other thing that I think is really important is to talk a little bit about Orchid's issue of platforms, and thinking about, the more we work with technology, the more we become aware that the environment that we're in is a little less neutral than when I could buy a nice big box with a CD in it. And now that as things have gotten more networked, we do have to be a little more aware of what happens when students put work out into the world, what kind of responses they'll get, what kind of use they're making of other people's material. There are a lot of issues, and the fact that the platforms themselves are not neutral. And may require us to think about the kinds of data we're asking our students to give to those platforms, and what their options are to participate or participate anonymously or opt out. And these are all also really complicated things, which perhaps, which we need to work with students and faculty to think through. And I think I will let that be the end of my ramble, and I forget who I'm supposed to. I think I throw it back to Brett again.
Thank you, Joe. So the larger issue that I want to kind of bring to the table, given what you've heard from Orchid and Joe and how complex this all is, and kind of Orchid talking about students finding their voice and being able to kind of challenge justice issues and share their stories, and Joe talking about kind of the cross-cutting of these different literacies and the challenge of teachers not feeling comfortable with teaching digital storytelling, for example, in their classrooms because they don't know how to edit. And so my larger issue is, do we agree that, and I'm on the writing side of this, I'm not so much on the media literacy side of this, I'm on the writing side of this, so the digital storytelling, the digital creation side of this. Do we agree that that form of communication is as important as text-based communication? And if we do, are schools preparing students to meaningfully participate? And that's kind of my large issue here. Another kind of context with which to look at what's been happening is this notion of a participatory culture. We all grew up, my generation, grew up with a top-down culture. All of the stories given to us were given to us through the media. They were given to us through the publishers. It all went through a series of filtered systems. And by the time it reached me as a teen or whatever, it had gone through numerous layers. With the advent of the internet and the like, everyone had a chance to find their voice. And that's where we are right now. It's now a bottom-up kind of feeding system in terms of all the stories that are out there. So it's flipped everything on its head. Who's got the expertise? Where are these stories valid? And so that's kind of the morass that we're in, the chaos that we're in. And if you take that one step further, our library, my library, was the traditional library, the brand new library at Kenyon, the Bodleian Library at Oxford, whatever you want to call it. And now that library is YouTube. Okay, so I mean, as of 2020, 500 hours are uploaded to YouTube every minute. Okay, anybody who's trying to find something, you go to YouTube first, whether it's crash course, whether it's a how-to. So if that's the library, then are we preparing students to contribute meaningfully to that library? That to me is the larger question here. So we can talk about platforms, we can talk about the amplification of student voice, but the issue is, can education as an institution, higher education and secondary education, can it respect digital storytelling and digital literacy as equal to text-based literacy? Kim, we still online? We still moving here?
We are. I'm guessing that perhaps the Kenyon internet went down since we had lost both Joe and Orchid. I'm at my house for that exact reason.
Oh, that's so funny.
So I guess this is your chance to have the spotlight until they get back online here. I'm going to send them a message.
Just what I was hoping for. Oh, bring it on. Well, actually, let's go to slide number 2, which was going to kind of tee up the next part of this talk before we get to the Q&A. So I just wanted to kind of put out there for everybody, what are these different literacies, just to kind of concretize them a little bit. So we know about traditional text-based literacy, academic reading, writing, all the different libraries with which we grew up and that still exist. But then you've got this digital storytelling literacy, okay? And these are stories to entertain and to educate. And that's YouTube and Vimeo and TikTok. And TikTok started out as a totally kind of, silly place and has now turned into a place where you can learn a lot very, very quickly. Third level, texting and emojis. Okay, this is basically oral communication as writing. How valid is it? Okay, all of the grammar rules fall apart. It's almost kind of hieroglyphics and letters all mixed together. But look at what it's doing. Okay, in terms of WhatsApp, Viber, dating apps, text, it is a primal and primary form of communication, do we need to be teaching people to communicate effectively here? And then this kind of what I'm calling the call and response literacies, communications that insist on a response, that whether it's a like, whether it's a whether it's literally you can kind of, text back, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and these are literacies that are also have this total mix of text, music, sound, and imagery. So I want to just put that out there so that we kind of all know the range of literacies that we're talking about. And if you kind of look at this list, again, go back to middle school and high school and college. Is education, one, respecting those second three bullet points, which is where kids are spending the majority of their time? And two, are they preparing kids to again, meaningfully, substantively, thoughtfully participate inside of these literacies, inside of these platforms? And I think that to me is like the large question for education. Because if we're all spending our time still 90% of our educational time in bullet number 1, when they're spending 90% of their time in bullets 2, 3, and 4, that's a mismatch. Do we have Joe and Orchid back?
It looks like we might have Joe back. I'm not sure.
Joe, you back? Okay. Well, then
Might still be you for a moment.
Okay, then let's just go to the third slide. These are kind of some of the questions, and I think let's just open it up for Q&A, which hopefully Joe and Orchid can then join us in. So this is attempting to summarize kind of some of the things that just threw out there. How does education formally acknowledge and teach these various critical literacies? Can this vast and deeply rooted institution, education, I'm kind of, putting it in all caps and with like, siren sounds around it, move and shift to accommodate these literacies? I think the answer is no. So what do we do about that? Does this involve compromises or opportunities or both? The answer is both. But again, that was a silly question for me to throw in there. And then the last one, what about the students' needs? And we haven't really talked about this. They're the ones that are going out into this world, into this digitally literate world. Okay, but we don't want them to have an anomalous education just in text-based literacy. And don't get me wrong, literature, text, words, love it, live for it. This is not one literacy over another, but I think there are dual literacies and they need to be acknowledged and then rebalanced in the classroom. And the only thing I'll throw out in terms of the issue that came up earlier, like teachers that they don't know how to, use iMovie and they're scared. My experience, I've had 10 years of this with middle school and high school students through Meridian Stories, is that the students have to figure that out. It's a beautiful flipped classroom model, at least on the kind of secondary education, where if kids are saying that they don't know how to edit or they don't know how to, the teacher's job is to you figure it out. Okay, my job is to know Edgar Allan Poe or know the water cycle or know whatever it is I'm teaching you. You guys figure it out. And when you do figure it out, tell me how you made those kind of, letters float in and form that kind of title. Okay, because I want to learn, and that will empower the students. So I don't think that's a wall, a huge wall. I think it's a permeable wall to kind of work through. So those are the questions I kind of would throw out without Orchid or Joe. They're still not here, Kim?
It looks like Joe is on my screen. He's frozen, but it looks like he's outdoors walking around trying to find reception and enough light.
That's exactly what's happening.
Okay. So I guess, do we have any?
That is exactly what's happening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can start. Yeah. Okay, Joe, we got you back.
Okay.
So
Well,
Joe, we've got the final
I guess
question.
I may just sit here on middle path.
Okay.
We've had some conversation in the chat too that I don't know if folks want to expand upon. Lisa mentioned the digital classroom students spend time in Clubhouse, Slack, Discord, thinking of them as perhaps new reference libraries. And then Rebecca also mentioned, I think there have also been dual literacies with kids who learn differently, and digital literacy provides a highway that allows everyone to drive on. So those might be some points to expand upon.
Yeah, I still see them, Clubhouse and kind of after school, and, the video project is the special project. It's the gifted and talented. And part of what I'm saying is we have to make it normative. It's got to be, so in a year of 10th grade, if you are normally writing 5 papers a year or 6 papers a year, let's make it an even number, 3 should be actual papers. And to me, 3 should be digital stories. Because if you're thinking in terms of, we're gonna get Joe back in there. If you're thinking in terms of the skills that kids need when they go into the world past Kenyon, if they know how to put together a short 3-minute digital story that can kind of change somebody's mind, that can kind of make people think twice, then they're gonna succeed. That is the skill set that is in demand out there. So I think there's also a bit of a gap between the skills being demanded out in a world of what I'm calling omnipresent change. It just keeps changing. It just keeps shifting. Technology is driving that. So what are we preparing them for? And the basis are all of these kind of skills, what are called 21st century skills, soft skills, human skills, life skills, whatever you want to call them. But the digital ability to communicate those skills with those skills is of utmost importance in my view. Joe, can we hear you there?
Can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Anything you want to add there, Joe, before we open up to all questions?
Well, power is important.
Wow.
Strange evening power outage in the village, but apparently we still got connectivity on South End. Well, I would say that the last part that you were addressing is one of the things that motivates a lot of what's happened at Kenyon. It's the question of how we can make sure that students are able to communicate in a variety of ways, in the same way that the liberal arts curriculum is about understanding ways to communicate the world differently, different intellectual skills for apprehending the world. There's the need to, and I would say this is a core writing pedagogy issue. You need to understand your audience. You need to understand what will bring your message to the people that you want to get it to. And particularly, again, to go back to the social responsibility issue, for those of us working in academia or in research-based fields, there's a real need to make sure that we've communicated, and it's raining. Perfect. I might just bring my college laptop in under something. But there's a real need to be able to communicate research findings to people in a way that they can comprehend, meeting people on their own abilities. So I will let that look while I look for something that's not going to lead to me getting a new laptop.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Any questions out there about these topics as we wind? I don't even know what time it is. So we've got another 15 minutes if we want to. Orchid, are you there? Orchid, are you back? No. Okay.
It looks like Isaac put a question in the chat. How should we successfully preserve and archive these new forms of media? With the sheer amount of content being created currently, is there a way we can ensure this important new media doesn't get lost when a server goes down? And who gets to decide then what is important?
There's a technical answer to that from the library community, where we say lots of copies keep stuff safe. And I think that's one of the answers is to, and you've kind of framed the question in the infrastructural way, can we make sure that servers are adequately backed up? Are we their own records, their own archives of their own digital work. So I think those are important questions. There are then these very, I think, broad questions of what is the institution interested in preserving, and is it an entire course website? Is it just a media object? Is it just the podcast file, or is it actually the whole website that went with the podcast? If it's an interactive thing, how do we preserve that as software changes? So there's an issue in working with faculty members. One of the questions that we try to do is say, how can we address this project? Do we want to preserve each and every interview as well as then the edited versions that are preserved? Preserving student work, or is it ephemeral? Some things aren't. It's not actually interest. Thing that's written, and as I think about my own college work, I'm kind of glad of that. So I think there are some interesting questions about what. It's always easier if we build those in early in the process. Brett, I don't know if you've got other thoughts about the preservation aspect.
Well, no, I think to me, the key word there that you came up with is ephemeral. I think part of the literacies that we've identified, some of them are ephemeral. So the question is an excellent one. I don't have an answer to that piece of it, but you're pointing to that, unlike unlike what we're used to with traditional literature, where it's published and it's out there and you keep a copy of the book and it all goes to the Library of Congress, I like the idea that some of it's ephemeral. Who decides what's ephemeral or not? I can't say. There was a question in here from Marion Crandall about kind of the digital divide, which is indeed very real. Here's, to me, my understanding is that the digital divide has to do certainly with broadband access, but when it comes to actually smartphones, at least globally, there are as many smartphones as there are people. So helping people to utilize the tools on their smartphones to communicate effectively is another one of these kind of equity pathways that I think digital storytelling can forge. It doesn't solve the issue of broadband and broadband access. That to me is a very different issue, that one well beyond my thought processes and well beyond education. Here in the state of Maine, it is a huge priority because there are vast swaths in the northern hump of the state that do not have broadband. So I'm very happy that we've got a governor in place who is prioritizing that. But that's digital divide is a tough piece amidst all of this, but I do think it can be kind of balanced out a little bit with just the power that you have in your smartphone, which are relatively ubiquitous. Any other questions, Kim? You see anything else out there?
Not a question, but a statement Benjamin put in the chat. For me, the liberal arts are about options over restrictions or quote musts. Love the idea of giving students options on assignments and the degree to which those assignments engage in digital life. And I believe there was a comment earlier on kind of to the same effect that it feels like it's an additive choice, not necessarily a restrictive.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I mean, the thing that to go back to teachers who are rather inflexible, and that's unfair, or who just really don't want to embrace kind of digital storytelling or the digital literacies because it's not kind of a part of their training. It's not necessarily as respected as kind of the straightforward 10-page paper piece of it. To me, the only way to get that change to happen is for colleges and schools, whether it's high schools or middle schools, for the superintendents, the principals, the presidents to actually mandate training to teachers, to at least bring them to a level of comfort. So to that point, the option is there for students. They can either write that paper, or they can create that 12-minute video or that 3-minute video or that podcast. But the teachers are the gatekeepers here. So it's you don't have to convince the students. They're willing and ready to roll either way, but they're the gatekeepers. So that's the behavior change that needs to be kind of thought through thoughtfully, and hopefully Kenyon could be a leader in that aspect of being that wide open to these various types of stories, whether it's kind of the essay or a digital story.
Well, and I think one of the things that you've said there that's really interesting, Brett, is that the faculty members need to be trained on the ability to do it themselves. And some of this is just good pedagogy. We don't have too many cases where we ask a faculty member to assign something they don't know how to do. But, for one thing, it's important for faculty members to have the experience of understanding, okay, this part is actually really quite technically easy. And this part is actually really quite technically difficult. And this thing is a fundamental disciplinary skill. And this is, maybe a fundamental presentation skill or, just a life skill. A lot of these at Kenyon have become group projects. So there are big components of learning to manage groups and manage workflows in groups. But one of the areas where we've been really successful is that we've worked a couple of times with an organization called Story Center, used to be known as the Center for Digital Storytelling, that does a wonderful, now they have a very specific definition of digital storytelling. They're really talking about short videos that are autobiographical, but they're really powerful. It's a wonderful organization, and it's a really powerful form of storytelling. And once faculty members do it, they both have a sense of, what would be required in redesigning a course to make space for it, but also what the benefits are. So you're absolutely right that it starts with making sure that faculty members have had the opportunities. Orchid's digital stories, by the way, have been gorgeous.
Oh, thank you. I'm super excited that I finally found a stable internet connection in the staff room. So I'm sorry I've missed a substantial portion of the conversation, but.
Orchid, can you put a link to your digital stories in the chat?
Yeah, I can do that. I'll have a look. Are you talking about the one that I just did with the?
I didn't know. Joe just made a mention of your beautiful work, so I think we'd all.
I think I know. Yeah, I think I know which one you're talking about, Joe. I'll put a link to it right now once I find it. I think it's on YouTube somewhere.
So, Orchid, did you want to add? We've kind of been talking away about these kind of larger questions, really, of making digital literacy more mainstream, basically, in both higher education and secondary education. You have some thoughts on that to kind of bring us to a close?
Well, I think, the fact that we lost power here was a really great sort of example of what actually happens, when we actually have a digital divide. And, one of the things that I was going to talk about, and I'm sorry that I'm in dark, but literally there is no power in Kenyon College at all. But I was really interested in sort of like talking about, what can actually enable, digital storytelling to flourish and play in any kind of secondary institution or a tertiary institution like Kenyon College or a university, is that you do need to have resources, but the resources and infrastructures it's a multi-layered kind of thing. It's not enough that you actually have to have I was just looking up last night, and something like 23% of Americans still do not have access to broadband telecommunications. And so, if you're still operating on dial-up, and that's in the low thousands, I don't think there's many people who are still using dial-up. But if you don't have access or regular access to some kind of telecommunication, fiber optic telecommunication network, then it's going to limit substantially as to what kind of things that you can do. The other thing that I don't know whether you've touched on, there is this sort of issue of access to technology, access to Wi-Fi and those kinds of things. But there's also the thing that, one thing that I'm concerned about is something that Joe touched on earlier, is digital privacy. And I don't know whether Gen Zs actually really they're living in a world where they have no privacy. They have a digital footprint basically since they're born. And so, you know, I do think it's really worth sort of engaging and thinking about what does it mean to think about what kind of shelter, what kind of private language do we have available to us in a very highly globalized networked world. How do we instruct and teach internet safety and knowing that, you know, social mediums like social platforms like Twitter aren't really safe. You know, you're constantly bombarded by trolls and what have you, and you know, how do we maintain that kind of safety? The other thing that is really important is that, and something that I've realized as an instructor, is that we do actually have a generation where students are under surveillance through parental controls, and so that actually often restricts in terms of what things that they can search for and what kind of freedom they have to actually look up on, you know, using search functions and so forth. And I do wonder how that sort of shapes their experience of the world when they do have these kinds of systems in place that actually prevent that kind of curiosity in digital spaces. That's not to say that you know, people should be looking up and there's terrible things on Reddit, but you know, there should be sort of safeguards in place. But you know, how do we encourage that kind of critical thinking where people can make judgments for themselves as to what is safe and what's not safe? So these are the kinds of things that I grapple with in the classroom. Lisa made a really great comment, I think, earlier. I don't think Lisa is there, about you know, students you know, really thriving in digital spaces, that you know, it's fuel for them, and I 100% agree with that. And I also agree with Joe's experiences that that it is sort of you know, the people's experiences of digital and familiarities with digital cultures is really widely varied. I teach a podcast class this semester called Climate Emergencies, where students are invited to undertake a kind of sonic, digital sonic storytelling to teach, to amplify, and I don't really want to use that word amplify, but to help work with a member of the community in Knox County to tell their story. And my experience has been is that, you know, there are 2 students in the class of 16 who are excellent at you know, putting together a podcast, and then there's one who might have sort of a general familiarity with audio technology, and then most of them don't actually have any experience at all. But you know, there are sort of students are very literate in some technologies, but not in other technologies. So for me, it's about how do we bridge the kind of intuitive thinking that comes with the technologies that they're thinking, that they can transfer into other forms of platforms and technologies. Something like Twine, for example, I mentioned earlier. Twine Game has a very steep learning curve, but everyone knows about hyperlinks and hypertext. We click on things every day, and so it's about sort of bringing in that familiarity with the tools that everyone you know, has experience with into a different platform, so that they can ask the questions and know what kinds of questions that they can use, that they can ask in order to get help. And so that, for me, that's really critical. And I'll look for that link right now.
I think that wraps it up, at least from my end. Kim, what do you want to do?
Sure. Yeah, I think it seems like everyone's had a really great conversation here. And I know many of you shared your links in the chat for either books or other virtual resources. If there are other things that come to mind after this, we'll send out a recording of the program. But if you have other resources that you'd like to connect around, please make sure to get in touch, and we're happy to facilitate that. But thank you so much to our panelists, to Brett for rolling with the punches as we saw all of the downsides of the virtual world, and then equally to Joe and to Orchid to pivoting and finding space in a city that is quite literally dark right now. So thank you so much. And we really appreciate everyone for coming and everyone for being so engaged in the conversation. And we hope to see you at a future event. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting us, and thank you everybody for coming. It was great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was amazing.
Thank you so much.
I'm just getting all the notifications on my phone that there may be an internet outage in my area.
I think I saw you rushing to your car, Joe. Did you rush? It's like, I'm coming.
I am at Ross Hall.